2:37 a.m. Somewhere in Baghdad, Iraq, 2007. The Black Hawk helicopter descended through absolute darkness, its rotors creating a rhythmic thump that echoed off buildings below. Inside the cabin, 12 men sat in studied silence, faces painted, night vision goggles mounted on helmets, rifles held ready. They weren't thinking about the mission's strategic importance or the intelligence that had led them here. They were thinking about the next 10 minutes, when they'd fast rope into a neighborhood controlled by Al-Qaeda and kick down the door of a house containing men who would rather die than surrender. Staff Sergeant Marcus Thompson checked his watch through his night vision. The green glow showed they were 30 seconds from insertion. Around him, his Ranger squad performed final checks with the efficiency of men who'd done this hundreds of times. Magazines seated properly, safety off, flex cuffs ready, breaching charges prepared. Medic positioned correctly in the stack. This was their third raid tonight. They'd hit 2 targets already, dry holes where intelligence said high-value targets would be, but weren't. This third location was different. Signals intelligence had confirmed the target was there now, talking on a cell phone, unaware that his electronic signature had just sentenced him to either death or capture within the next few minutes. The mathematics were simple and brutal. American Special Operations Forces conducted an average of 12 raids per night across Iraq at the peak of operations. Rangers and Delta Force, the Army's premier direct action units, were responsible for most of these. They operated in a world most Americans never knew existed, conducting missions that would never be publicly acknowledged, killing or capturing enemies whose deaths or disappearances would never be explained. What the terrorists hiding in Baghdad's neighborhoods didn't fully understand was the technological and tactical overmatch they faced. American Special Operations Forces owned the night. Thermal imaging that made darkness irrelevant. Night vision that turned pitch black into green daylight. Intelligence networks that tracked phone calls and internet activity in real time, and most critically, warriors who'd refined close-quarters combat to a level that approached perfection. This is the story of the night raids, how Rangers and Delta Force operators hunted America's most wanted enemies through the darkness of Iraq and Afghanistan, of how direct action missions evolved from crude raids to surgical strikes, of how the night became America's domain and the enemy's nightmare. This is the story of what happens when the world's most elite warriors come for you at 3 a.m., when you're sleeping in your bed, thinking you're safe. The 75th Ranger Regiment exists for one primary mission: direct action raids conducted under any conditions, anywhere in the world. The regiment consists of 3 battalions, 1st, 2nd, and 3rd, plus the Regimental Special Troops Battalion. Approximately 3,500 Rangers total, organized into rifle companies that deploy continuously to combat zones. During the height of operations in Iraq and Afghanistan, Ranger companies conducted rotations measuring in months, operating nearly every single night. Becoming a Ranger requires passing some of the Army's most demanding training. After completing basic infantry training and airborne school, candidates attend the Ranger Assessment and Selection Program, ERIASEP, 8 weeks designed to identify men with the physical endurance, mental toughness, and character necessary for Ranger operations. RASP isn't about teaching skills, it's about testing whether candidates can function under extreme stress, sleep deprivation, and physical exhaustion. The attrition rate hovers around 50%. Those who graduate proceed to their Ranger Battalion, where the real education begins. Sergeant First Class David Rodriguez, a Ranger squad leader with multiple deployments, described the culture. Rangers aren't the most elite special operations unit, that's Delta. We're not the most specialized, that's the SEALs, or Green Berets. What we are is the best light infantry in the world, optimized for direct action. We kick down doors, clear buildings, and capture or kill bad guys. That's it, that's what we're good at. The training is constant and progressive. New Rangers start with basic skills: room clearing, close quarters marksmanship, small unit tactics. As they gain experience, they advance to more complex operations: multi-building assaults, hostage rescue scenarios, non-permissive environment insertions. By the time a Ranger deploys to combat, he's conducted hundreds of training raids. The muscle memory is ingrained: how to move through a building, how to distinguish threats from non-combatants in split seconds, how to function as part of a team where everyone's life depends on everyone else doing their job perfectly. The Ranger ethos emphasizes speed, aggression, and violence of action. When Rangers hit a target, they do it fast and overwhelming. The goal is to achieve such immediate dominance that resistance becomes futile. Enemies should be dead or captured before they fully understand what's happening. If Rangers are elite infantry, Delta Force is something beyond elite, a unit that exists in the shadows, conducting missions the government rarely acknowledges. Officially called 1st Special Forces Operational Detachment Delta, 1st SFODD, but commonly known as the Unit, or simply Delta, the organization was founded in 1977 specifically for counterterrorism and hostage rescue operations requiring capabilities that didn't exist elsewhere in the U.S. military. Delta's selection process is legendary for its difficulty. Candidates, already experienced soldiers, often Rangers or Green Berets, endure a month-long assessment that tests physical endurance, land navigation, psychological stability, and the ability to think clearly under extreme stress. The attrition rate exceeds 90%. Most candidates don't fail specific tests. They simply don't meet the undefined standard that Delta selectors are looking for. What that standard is remains deliberately vague. Maturity, judgment, the ability to function independently, the capacity for extreme violence controlled by equally extreme discipline. Those who pass selection attend the operator training course, 6 months of intensive training in close quarters combat, advanced marksmanship, demolitions, vehicle operations, communications, and tradecraft. The training is designed to create operators who can function in any environment, against any enemy with minimal support. A former Delta operator, speaking anonymously years after retiring, described the difference between Rangers and Delta. Rangers are a hammer, a very good hammer, extremely effective for what they do. Delta is a scalpel. We do the missions that require not just skill, but judgment. Hostage rescue, where one wrong decision means dead hostages. Leadership targeting, where you need to capture someone alive for intelligence. Operations in politically sensitive areas where everything has to be perfect. Delta operators are older than Rangers on average, usually in their 30s with years of military experience. They're trained not just to follow orders, but to make complex decisions independently. Mission planning involves the operators who will execute the mission, not just commanders issuing orders. The unit is organized into squadrons, though the exact structure remains classified. Each squadron specializes in specific mission sets. One focuses on maritime operations, another on vehicle-mounted raids, others on different specialties. Delta's equipment is cutting-edge, often custom-made for specific missions. Their weapons are modified to exact specifications. Their communications gear uses encryption that other units don't have access to. Their night vision and thermal imaging systems are generations ahead of standard issue. But technology alone doesn't make Delta effective. It's the operators, men who've spent years perfecting their craft, who've conducted hundreds of missions, who can read situations and make split-second decisions that balance mission accomplishment with minimizing collateral damage. The Intelligence Network. 0009, 15, 0013. Night raids begin long before helicopters launch. They begin with intelligence, finding the targets, determining their locations, understanding their patterns, and identifying the optimal moment to strike. The intelligence networks supporting special operations in Iraq and Afghanistan were unprecedented in their sophistication and integration. Signals Intelligence, SIGINT. The National Security Agency and military intelligence units monitored communications throughout Iraq and Afghanistan. Cell phone calls, internet traffic, radio communications, all were intercepted, analyzed, and used to track high-value targets. When a target made a phone call, SIGINT could identify the location within meters. When they sent an email or used social media, analysts could track their digital footprint. This created opportunities. If you knew exactly where someone was right now, you could launch a raid to capture them before they moved. Human intelligence, HUMINT. Informants, detainees providing information, local sources, human intelligence provided context that technical collection couldn't. Someone might tell you not just where a target was, but how many guards he had, what weapons they carried, whether his family was present. HUMINT was often the difference between a successful raid and a disaster. Knowing a building's layout before entry prevented surprises. Understanding enemy patterns helped identify the best time to strike, when targets were sleeping, when guards were fewer, when non-combatants weren't present. Imagery Intelligence, IMINT. Satellites, drones, and reconnaissance aircraft provided visual confirmation. A predator drone could orbit over a suspected target location for hours, watching who entered and exited, confirming through thermal imaging how many people were inside, identifying vehicles and weapons. This persistent surveillance created what intelligence analysts called pattern-of-life analysis, understanding targets' routines so precisely that you could predict their movements and plan raids accordingly. Integration through fusion cells. The breakthrough wasn't any single intelligence source, but their integration, specialized intelligence fusion cells, teams of analysts from different agencies working together, combined SIGINT, HUMINT, and IMINT into actionable packages for operators. The cycle worked like this. SIGINT would detect a high-value target's phone call, providing a location. A drone would move overhead to confirm visually. Analysts would cross-reference with HUMINT about that location. Within hours, sometimes minutes, a raid package would be prepared and operators would launch. This find, fix, finish cycle, finding the target through intelligence, fixing their location through surveillance, finishing them through raids, became the backbone of special operations targeting in Iraq and Afghanistan. Major Sarachin, an intelligence officer who supported Ranger operations, described the process. We'd get a tip, maybe from a detainee, maybe from SIGINT. We'd start tracking. Maybe it's a phone number, maybe it's a vehicle. We'd build a pattern. Where does this person go? When do they sleep? Who do they associate with? Then one night, all the pieces align. He's at a location we can hit, the timing is right, and we launch. Night raid planning is intensive, detailed, and conducted under extreme time pressure. A typical timeline: intelligence confirms a high-value target is at a specific location at 11 p.m. The decision to raid is made by 11:30 p.m. Mission planning occurs from 11:30 p.m. to 1 a.m. Launch happens at 1:30 a.m. The entire process from target confirmation to boots on ground takes about 2.5 hours. Captain James Mitchell, a Ranger Company commander who led dozens of raids, described the planning intensity. You're working with incomplete information under time pressure, planning an operation where people's lives, your soldiers and potentially civilians, depend on getting it right. You have to balance speed with thoroughness. Plan too long and the target leaves. Plan too quickly and you miss critical details that get people killed. The planning produces a detailed mission brief that every operator receives. They learn the target's identity and why they're important. They see imagery of the objective. They understand their specific roles. Who breaches the door? Who enters first? Who clears which rooms? Who provides security? Who handles detainees? Questions are encouraged. If anyone sees a problem with the plan, they're expected to speak up. The culture emphasizes that the newest private can identify issues that officers miss. Everyone has responsibility for mission success. By the time operators board helicopters, they've internalized the plan. They know what to do if everything goes right and what to do when, not if, things go wrong. The helicopters, usually MH-60 Blackhawks or MH-47 Chinooks, flown by the 160th Special Operations Aviation Regiment, SOR, known as the Night Stalkers, approach the target area at low altitude using terrain masking to avoid detection. The flight is conducted in near total darkness. The pilots fly using night vision goggles, navigating by GPS and terrain-following radar. They avoid known anti-aircraft positions, fly routes that minimize time over hostile areas, and approach targets from directions that provide tactical advantages. Staff Sergeant Marcus Thompson, riding in the helicopter cabin, performed his pre-insertion ritual, checking that his rifle's magazine was properly seated for the dozenth time, verifying his night vision goggles worked, mentally rehearsing the first 30 seconds after hitting the ground. Around him, his squad did the same. 11 other Rangers, each with specific roles, each trusting that everyone else would execute perfectly. The newest member was on his third deployment. There were no rookies on a Ranger assault force. The crew chief's hand signals indicated 2 minutes to insertion. Rangers disconnected from the helicopter's internal communication system and switched to their team radios. They conducted final equipment checks, ensuring nothing was loose that would make noise, verifying night vision was functioning, confirming everyone was ready. 1 minute out, the helicopter began descending toward the landing zone, a small open area approximately 200 meters from the target building. The plan called for a ground insertion rather than fast roping directly onto the target. This approach was quieter, reducing the warning time for anyone inside the building. 30 seconds. Rangers moved toward the cabin door, stacking in exit order. The first soldier out would be the point man, responsible for leading the patrol to the target. The last out would be the squad leader, Thompson, who needed to see everyone exit successfully. The helicopter flared, rotating slightly to put its side door facing the direction of movement. Before it fully landed, Rangers were jumping out, hitting the ground and moving immediately toward their objective. The entire 12-man squad exited in under 5 seconds. The Night Stalker pilots immediately lifted off. Staying on the ground made them vulnerable to RPG attack. They'd orbit nearby, ready to extract the assault force or provide fire support if needed. On the ground, the Ranger squad moved quickly through the darkened neighborhood. Their night vision goggles turned absolute darkness into green daylight. They could see clearly while anyone looking at them saw only shadows. The patrol formation was standard. Point man leading, followed by the breacher carrying explosive charges and a shotgun, then the automatic rifleman, then pairs of riflemen, with Thompson at the rear controlling the movement. They moved silently, communicating through hand signals, weapons oriented outward covering potential threat areas. Dogs barked as they passed, local animals sensing movement. This was inevitable, but it also provided warning to targets. The squad increased their pace, jogging now, closing the distance before anyone inside the target building could react to the disturbance. At 50 meters from the target, they slowed and transitioned to tactical movement, careful, deliberate, scanning for threats. The building appeared quiet. No lights visible, no obvious signs of awareness. The point man reached the compound wall, a typical Iraqi residential structure with a courtyard surrounded by walls, the house itself set back from the street. He held position while others moved forward, stacking along the wall in assault order. The breach is the mission's most dangerous moment, the transition from stealth to violence when the assault force is most vulnerable and when precise execution matters most. The Rangers stacked at the compound gate, the entry point to the courtyard. The breacher moved forward with a sledgehammer. Explosive charges were available, but command had specified minimal destruction if possible. This was a capture mission where intelligence gathered from the site mattered as much as taking the target. Thompson whispered into his radio, "Set." Each team leader confirmed their element was ready. ISR overhead confirmed no movement visible outside the building. The quick reaction force acknowledged ready status. Thompson gave the command, "Execute." The breacher swung the sledgehammer against the gate lock. The metal gate flew open with a crash that shattered the night's silence. Immediately, the point man rushed through, scanning the courtyard through his night vision. Empty, no immediate threats, direct path to the house's main door. The squad flowed through the gate in smooth succession, each ranger moving to predetermined positions. 4 moved toward the house door. 4 established security positions covering windows and potential threat directions. 2 moved to the compound's rear to prevent anyone escaping. Thompson and the medic held at the gate, controlling the operation. At the house door, the assault team stacked, 4 rangers in single file, weapons ready, preparing to enter. The breacher checked the door, locked. He stepped back and drove his boot into the door beside the lock. The door exploded inward. The point man entered immediately, moving right and scanning his sector through his rifle's holographic sight and night vision. The second man entered simultaneously, moving left. The third man went straight. The fourth provided security at the doorway. Inside was darkness. The thermal imaging showed heat signatures, multiple people, some moving, some stationary. The Rangers' night vision gave them complete advantage. They could see everything. The occupants, awakening to the sound of the door breaking, could see nothing. "Rangers, get down! Get down now!" The commands were shouted in English and Arabic, repeated continuously as the team moved through the house. The first room, a living area, contained 3 military-age males who were rising from sleeping positions. "Down! Down! Get your hands up!" One male reached towards something. Might be a weapon, might be nothing. The point man's decision had to be instant. The male's hands came up empty. He was simply complying clumsily while terrified. The Rangers pushed forward, forcing all 3 prone, flex-cuffing their hands behind their backs, clearing them from the threat board. The second team was already moving deeper into the house, clearing rooms sequentially. A bedroom. 2 women and several children, screaming in fear. "Stay down! We're not here to hurt you!" A translator's voice over the radio repeated assurances in Arabic, while Rangers secured the room and moved forward. Another bedroom. A single male, the physical description matching the high-value target. He was reaching for an AK-47 leaning against the wall beside his bed. The lead ranger fired, a controlled pair of shots center mass. The target fell. The Rangers flooded the room, securing the weapon, checking the target for explosives or suicide vest, providing immediate medical treatment despite the lethal wounds. "Target down," Thompson heard over the radio. Continuing clearance. The rest of the house was cleared rapidly. No additional threats, no additional weapons found besides the AK-47. Total time from breaching the gate to securing the house, 90 seconds. With the building secured, the mission transitioned from assault to exploitation, gathering intelligence, processing detainees, and preparing for exfiltration. The target who'd been shot was dead despite the medic's efforts. His identity was confirmed through biometrics. Fingerprints and facial photographs compared against databases. This was definitely the intended target, a mid-level al-Qaeda facilitator responsible for moving foreign fighters into Iraq and financing bombing operations. The 3 military-age males from the living room were processed. Rangers collected biometrics, photographed them, and questioned them through the translator. Who were they? What was their relationship to the target? Did they have information about other al-Qaeda members? One claimed to be the target's brother, present for a family visit. Another said he was a neighbor who'd been sleeping there because his own house was damaged. The third refused to speak. All three were flex-cuffed and prepared for transport. They'd be interrogated more thoroughly at a detention facility. The women and children were moved to a single room, guarded but treated as non-combatants. The translator explained what was happening, tried to calm the crying children, assured them they weren't in danger. The women were terrified, hostile, screaming accusations that the Rangers had murdered their family member without cause. While detainee processing continued, an exploitation team moved through the house collecting intelligence. They photographed everything: documents, computers, cell phones, papers pinned to walls. They seized hard drives, SIM cards, notebooks, anything that might contain information about Al-Qaeda networks. This intelligence exploitation was often more valuable than capturing the target himself. A cell phone's contact list could identify dozens of other terrorists. Computer files might reveal attack plans. Documents could expose financing networks. The intelligence gathered from one raid often generated targets for subsequent raids, creating a cycle where each operation enabled more operations. Sergeant Michael Ortiz, leading the exploitation team, moved through the house methodically. In the bedroom where the target died, he found a laptop hidden under the mattress. In the living room, papers scattered on a table showed names and phone numbers. In a closet, a cardboard box contained multiple cell phones, a counter-surveillance measure terrorists used, switching phones to avoid tracking. All of it was photographed in place, then collected and bagged with evidence labels. Chain of custody was maintained. Every item needed to be properly documented so intelligence analysts could use it, and, if necessary, prosecutors could present it in legal proceedings. Outside, security was maintained. 2 rangers at the compound gate watched the street for any approaching threats. 2 more on the roof provided overwatch, scanning the neighborhood through thermal optics for anyone positioning to attack the objective. The quick reaction force remained on standby, ready to respond if the situation deteriorated. The neighborhood was waking up. Lights were coming on in nearby houses. People were emerging to see what the commotion was. The Rangers maintained security but didn't engage civilians unless threatened. The goal was to complete the mission and leave before local tensions escalated into confrontation. Thompson checked his watch. 2:31 a.m. They'd been on target for 13 minutes. The mission was proceeding smoothly, but every minute increased the risk. Time to exfiltrate. The extraction from the objective, was planned as carefully as the assault. The Blackhawks returned, landing at the original insertion point. The Rangers moved as a unit, security elements collapsing back toward the objective, then the exploitation team, then the detainee handlers with their 3 prisoners, finally the assault team and Thompson. They moved quickly but not frantically. Rushing created mistakes. Someone might trip, an enemy might not be properly secured, equipment might be left behind. The patrol moved at a fast walk, maintaining formation, staying alert for threats. As they reached the landing zone, the helicopters flared and landed. Rangers loaded quickly. Detainees first, pushed into the cabin and guarded by 2 Rangers. Then the assault force, each man finding a seat and immediately establishing outward security with his weapon. Finally, Thompson, conducting a head count to ensure everyone was aboard. The Night Stalker pilot didn't wait for confirmation. As soon as he felt the load settle, he pulled collective and lifted off. The Rangers were pressed into their seats by G-forces as the helicopter accelerated and climbed, putting distance between itself and potential ground fire. The flight back to base took 15 minutes. In the cabin, Rangers began mental decompressions, the adrenaline of the raid fading, fatigue emerging. Some closed their eyes, others stared at nothing, processing what they'd just experienced. The detainees sat on the floor, flex-cuffed and blindfolded, guarded by Rangers. They'd be handed over to detention operations personnel upon landing, where they'd be processed, interrogated, and either held or released based on what intelligence gathered from the raid revealed. Thompson conducted a quick mental after-action review. The mission had gone well. Target killed. No friendly casualties. Intelligence collected. Additional detainees captured. But there were things to improve. The breach had been louder than ideal. The room clearing could have been faster. Communication could have been clearer. These small improvements accumulated over dozens, hundreds of raids. That's how Rangers maintained their edge. Not through complacency after successful missions, but through constant refinement of already highly effective tactics. At 2:52 a.m., the helicopters landed at the forward operating base. Rangers offloaded, turned over detainees to guards, carried equipment to the team room, and began post-mission procedures. Weapons were cleared and cleaned. Equipment was inspected for damage. Ammunition was restocked. Biometric equipment was connected to computers to upload the data collected. The intelligence exploitation team began initial review of materials seized from the objective. Thompson conducted a quick debrief with his squad. What went well, what needed improvement, any issues that required immediate attention. The formal after-action review would happen later, but initial impressions were captured while memory was fresh. By 3:30 a.m., most Rangers had completed post-mission tasks and were trying to grab a few hours of sleep. But Thompson, as squad leader, had additional responsibilities. He wrote a mission report documenting the operation. He coordinated with intelligence personnel about the materials collected. He checked on the Ranger who'd made the lethal shot, ensuring he was mentally okay. Killing people, even enemies, even when justified, affected soldiers differently, and leaders needed to monitor their men's psychological state. At 4:15 a.m., Thompson finally lay down on his bunk. His mind replayed the raid, the helicopter insertion, stacking at the gate, flowing through the breach, the split second when the target reached for the AK-47. He'd participated in over 200 combat missions across multiple deployments. The routine was familiar, but familiarity didn't mean comfort. Each mission carried risks. Each operation could be the one where someone didn't come back. He set his alarm for 8 a.m. 4 hours of sleep, then the cycle would begin again. Intelligence review, mission planning, rehearsal, and another raid tomorrow night. While Rangers conducted raids with proven, standardized tactics, Delta Force operations reflected different priorities and capabilities. Delta's targets were typically higher value. Senior terrorist leaders, individuals with unique intelligence, situations requiring capture rather than kill. The missions were often more complex. Targets in urban areas where collateral damage had to be minimized, operations requiring stealth until the final moment, scenarios where judgment mattered as much as firepower. A Delta operation from 2007 illustrates the difference. Intelligence identified Abu Omar, a senior al-Qaeda leader living in a middle-class neighborhood in western Baghdad. The house was in a densely populated area surrounded by other residences containing families. Direct assault risked alerting the target, who intelligence suggested had a suicide vest and would detonate rather than surrender. The mission required getting inside before he could react. That meant stealth over speed, precision over overwhelming force. The operation plan used a technique Delta had perfected, the soft knock entry. At 3:30 a.m., when intelligence confirmed Abu Omar was sleeping, 2 Delta operators approached his house on foot. They'd infiltrated the neighborhood hours earlier, moving through alleys, avoiding attention, positioned and waiting for the optimal moment. They reached the house's door. One operator, using lockpicks, quietly unlocked it, taking 3 minutes of careful manipulation to defeat the lock without noise. The door opened. The operators entered silently, night vision allowing them to navigate the dark interior. They moved through the house room by room, clearing each space without waking the occupants. In one bedroom, children slept. The operators moved past without disturbing them. In another, a woman slept. She never knew armed men were in her house. Finally, Abu Omar's bedroom. He was sleeping, his wife beside him. The operators moved swiftly. One covered the wife, the other grabbed Abu Omar and placed a hand over his mouth before he could scream. Within seconds, he was flex-cuffed, blindfolded, and being carried out of the house. The entire operation, from entering the house to exfiltrating with the detainee, took 8 minutes. Abu Omar's wife woke to find her husband gone. The children never woke at all. The neighbors had no idea American forces had been there until Iraqi police arrived later that morning to inform the family. This soft knock approach wasn't always possible, but when it was, Delta preferred it. Less violence meant fewer people traumatized. Less destruction meant less reconstruction required. Less noise meant fewer chances for enemy fighters to rally. Master Sergeant Thomas Payne, a Delta operator who would later receive the Medal of Honor for actions in a different operation, explained the philosophy. Anyone can kick down a door and shoot people. That's easy. The hard thing is getting in and out without anyone knowing you were there, except the guy you came for. That requires patience, skill, and discipline that goes beyond physical capability. Delta's target selection also reflected different priorities. While Rangers focused on the broad counterterrorism fight, disrupting networks, capturing mid-level operatives, killing fighters, Delta hunted the highest value individuals. Their targets were men whose capture or death would significantly impact enemy operations. This meant Delta operated under more scrutiny. High-value targets often had political dimensions. Their capture might require coordination with the Iraqi government. Their treatment had to be scrupulously correct because they might eventually face trial. Every aspect of Delta operations reflected this higher standard. The intelligence gathered from night raids didn't just sit in databases. It immediately fed back into the targeting cycle, generating more raids in what became known as the industrial counterterrorism approach. Here's how it worked. A raid captures a mid-level Al-Qaeda operative and seizes his cell phone. Analysts extract the phone's data, call logs, text messages, contacts. They identify numbers that called this phone repeatedly. Some numbers are already associated with known terrorists. Others are new. Signals intelligence begins tracking these new numbers. Where are they located? Who are they communicating with? What patterns emerge? Within hours, analysts identify several persons of interest who warrant further investigation. Human intelligence supplements technical collection. Detainees are questioned. Who was the operative working with? Who were his contacts? Where did meetings occur? Some detainees cooperate, providing details. Others refuse, but their refusal to discuss certain topics itself provides information about what's important. Within 24 to 48 hours of the original raid, intelligence has identified several new targets. These targets are prioritized based on their apparent seniority, their connections to ongoing attack planning, and the feasibility of operations against them. The cycle continues. Rangers are dealt to conduct raids against these new targets. Those raids produce more intelligence. That intelligence generates more targets. The cycle accelerates, each operation enabling multiple subsequent operations. At the peak of operations in Iraq, 2006-2007, this cycle ran continuously. Rangers and Delta collectively conducted a dozen or more raids per night. Each raid generated intelligence for future raids. The effect was cumulative. Terrorist networks were being rolled up faster than they could reconstitute. Lieutenant Colonel Sean McFarland, who commanded forces in Ramadi during this period, described the impact. In 6 months, we went from a city completely controlled by Al-Qaeda to a city where AQI couldn't operate openly. The night raids were critical. We were capturing or killing their leaders faster than they could replace them. We were seizing intelligence faster than they could change their patterns. We were inside their decision cycle and they couldn't react fast enough. The approach wasn't without criticism. Some argued that the raids alienated the population. Middle-of-the-night home invasions, even when conducted professionally, created resentment. Mistakes happened. Wrong houses raided based on faulty intelligence, civilians traumatized by the experience, property damage that had to be compensated. But the operational effectiveness was undeniable. Areas where intensive night raids occurred saw dramatic reductions in enemy activity. Terrorist networks that had operated freely found themselves hunted continuously, unable to plan or execute attacks because their leadership was being systematically eliminated. Despite their elite training and technological advantages, Rangers and Delta operators were not invulnerable. The nature of direct action raids, entering buildings controlled by armed enemies, often without complete intelligence about what was inside, meant casualties were inevitable. Some losses came from enemy action during raids. Specialist Pat Tillman, the former NFL player who'd left professional football to join the Rangers, was killed in Afghanistan in April 2004. While his death occurred during a patrol rather than a direct action raid, it highlighted the risks Rangers accepted. He'd participated in the invasion of Iraq and numerous combat operations before his death in a tragic friendly fire incident. Staff Sergeant Justin DeCrow, a Delta operator, was killed in Iraq in 2006 during a raid when insurgents detonated explosives that collapsed a building. He'd conducted over 200 combat missions before his death on his final deployment before retirement. Sergeant First Class Jared Monty, a Ranger, was killed in Afghanistan in 2006 attempting to rescue a wounded soldier. During a raid that encountered unexpected resistance, he was posthumously awarded the Medal of Honor for his actions. Other losses occurred not during raids but during supporting operations. In 2005, an MH-47 Chinook carrying a Ranger Quick Reaction Force was shot down in Afghanistan by an RPG, killing all aboard. The Rangers were responding to support a SEAL team in contact with enemy forces. The loss highlighted the risk not just of assaults, but of the entire ecosystem supporting special operations. Close calls were even more common than casualties. Rangers and Delta operators routinely survive situations that should have killed them, saved by training, equipment, or pure luck. During a 2007 raid in Baghdad, a Ranger squad entered a building rigged with explosives. The detonator malfunctioned. Had it worked, the entire squad would have died. They discovered the explosives only after securing the building, when an engineer sweeping for secondary threats found the initiator system. The discovery led to new protocols for checking buildings for booby traps before full occupation. Staff Sergeant Kevin Vance, leading a Delta assault element, kicked open a door during a 2006 raid in Ramadi and came face-to-face with a suicide bomber who was reaching for the detonator on his vest. Vance fired reflexively, killing the bomber before he could trigger the explosives. The bomb squad later determined that the vest contained enough explosives to destroy the entire room and everyone in it. During a 2008 operation in Afghanistan, a Ranger platoon inserted via helicopter into a valley that was supposed to be lightly defended. Instead, they landed in the middle of a Taliban stronghold with dozens of fighters who immediately attacked. The Rangers fought for 6 hours, running critically low on ammunition, before attack helicopters and additional reinforcements could reach them. They suffered multiple casualties but held their position and eventually secured their objective. The psychological toll was significant. Rangers and Delta operators conducted operations knowing that each raid could be their last. They watched teammates die or suffer catastrophic injuries. They killed enemies at close range, sometimes seeing their faces clearly through night vision. The cumulative stress of hundreds of combat missions affected everyone differently. Some thrived on the intensity, becoming addicted to the adrenaline and purpose that combat provided. Others developed anxiety, PTSD symptoms, or struggled with the moral weight of their actions. Specialist Robert James, a Ranger with 3 combat deployments, described the mental burden. You're doing room clearing every single night for months. You've killed people. You've watched friends get wounded. You're constantly on edge, waiting for the raid where things go wrong. When you come home, you can't just turn that off. You still wake up at 2 a.m. ready to go on a raid. You hear a door slam and you're reaching for a rifle that isn't there. The military provided mental health resources, but the culture of Rangers and Delta, emphasizing toughness, competence, and never showing weakness, made it difficult for many operators to seek help. Admitting psychological struggles felt like admitting you couldn't handle the mission, potentially ending a career you'd spent years building. The evolution of night raid tactics culminated in the operation that killed Osama bin Laden on May 2, 2011, conducted by Naval Special Warfare Development Group, SEAL Team 6, using methodologies developed through thousands of Ranger and Delta operations. The bin Laden raid, while the most famous, was one operation in a campaign that Rangers and Delta had been conducting for a decade. By May 2011, Special Operations Forces had conducted tens of thousands of night raids across Iraq and Afghanistan. These operations had systematically dismantled terrorist networks. Senior leaders were killed or captured. Mid-level operatives were eliminated faster than organizations could replace them. The intelligence collected from each raid enabled more raids, creating an accelerating cycle that enemies couldn't counter. The impact was strategic, not just tactical. Areas where intensive night raids occurred saw dramatic reductions in enemy activity. Terrorist organizations that had operated freely found themselves unable to plan or execute attacks because their leadership was continuously targeted. By 2011, Al-Qaeda in Iraq had been reduced from an organization that controlled territory and conducted daily attacks to scattered cells struggling to survive. The Taliban in Afghanistan, while not defeated, were severely degraded by years of continuous targeting that eliminated their most capable leaders and disrupted their networks. By the time American combat operations wound down in Iraq, 2011, and Afghanistan, 2021, Rangers and Delta Force had fundamentally changed special operations warfare. At the peak of operations, Special Operations Forces were conducting over 3,000 raids per year in Iraq alone. This tempo, averaging 8 to 10 raids per night, was sustained for years, something no military in history had attempted. The infrastructure required to support this tempo was massive. Intelligence networks processing terabytes of data daily, logistics systems maintaining equipment for constant operations, aviation assets flying hundreds of missions monthly, detention facilities processing thousands of detainees, and most critically, operators willing to conduct mission after mission despite accumulating stress. The success demonstrated that with sufficient resources and will, special operations could conduct sustained campaigns rather than occasional raids. This was a doctrinal revolution. Special operations transitioned from niche capability used for specific high-value missions to a primary tool for counterterrorism campaigns. The night raids proved that terrorist networks could be systematically dismantled through continuous targeting of leadership and infrastructure. Al-Qaeda in Iraq, which had seemed unstoppable in 2006, was reduced to marginal effectiveness by 2008, primarily through relentless night raids that eliminated leaders faster than the organization could replace them. The technique, called network targeting or industrial counterterrorism, combined intelligence to map terrorist networks with raids to disrupt them. Each operation generated intelligence for subsequent operations, creating an accelerating cycle that enemies couldn't counter. This approach influenced counterterrorism strategy globally. Military and intelligence services worldwide studied American special operations methods, adopting similar approaches to their own terrorist threats. The raids demonstrated how technology could multiply human effectiveness. Night vision gave operators overwhelming advantage in darkness. Communication systems allowed real-time coordination of complex operations. Biometrics enabled positive identification of targets. Overhead surveillance provided situational awareness that previous generations couldn't achieve. But the operations also demonstrated technology's limits. Even with the best equipment, success ultimately depended on human judgment, courage, and skill. Operators still had to walk into buildings where enemies waited. They still had to make split-second decisions about threats. They still had to function when equipment failed or situations exceeded planning. The lesson was balance. Embrace technology that enhances human capability, but never mistake technological superiority for guaranteed success. The operational success came with costs that extended far beyond casualties during missions. Between 2001 and 2021, dozens of Rangers and Delta operators were killed in action. Hundreds were wounded, many catastrophically. Amputations, traumatic brain injuries, burns, and wounds that required years of treatment and left permanent disabilities. But the invisible casualties likely exceeded the visible ones. PTSD, traumatic brain injury from blast exposure, depression, anxiety, substance abuse, these conditions affected significant portions of Special Operations veterans. The suicide rate told a grim story. Special Operations personnel, both active duty and veterans, died by suicide at rates significantly higher than the general military population, which was itself elevated compared to civilians. Many of these suicides occurred years after leaving service, suggesting that combat trauma's effects persisted long after the missions ended. The family cost was equally significant. Divorce rates among Special Operations personnel were elevated. Children grew up with fathers who were constantly deployed, or when home, were emotionally distant and struggling with trauma. Spouses managed everything alone for months or years at a time, then tried to reintegrate partners who'd been changed by experiences they couldn't share. Sergeant First Class David Rodriguez, who conducted over 400 combat missions across 7 deployments, described the family cost. "My kids grew up without me. I missed birthdays, school events, years of their lives. When I was home, I wasn't really present. I was thinking about the next deployment or processing what happened on the last one. My marriage survived, but barely. My wife essentially raised our kids alone, while married to a man who was physically present, maybe 40% of the time, and emotionally present even less." The career cost was also significant. Rangers and Delta operators developed highly specialized skills that often didn't translate to civilian employment. Teaching private citizens to conduct night raids wasn't a marketable skill. The discipline and teamwork were valuable, but many veterans struggled to find careers that provided the same sense of purpose and intensity that Special Operations had. Some thrived, using their military experience as foundation for successful civilian careers in law enforcement, private security, business, or public service. Others struggled, unable to adjust to civilian life's different pace and priorities, finding normal work meaningless after years of life and death missions. The night raid campaigns in Iraq and Afghanistan produced lessons that will shape Special Operations for decades. Lesson 1. Intelligence is decisive. Operations succeed or fail based on intelligence quality. The best operators in the world can't overcome bad intelligence about target locations, building layouts, or enemy capabilities. Conversely, even average operators can succeed with excellent intelligence. Future Special Operations require continued investment in intelligence capabilities. Human sources, technical collection, analysis, and most critically, integration of multiple intelligence sources into actionable packages. Lesson 2. Sustained operations require system thinking. The tempo achieved by Rangers and Delta wasn't just about operator capability. It required logistics, intelligence, aviation, medical, detention, and countless other systems functioning perfectly. Future conflicts requiring sustained Special Operations tempo will need similar system investments. You can't just train elite operators and expect them to conduct continuous operations without the infrastructure to support them. Lesson 3. Precision reduces strategic cost. Night raids, despite their moral complexity, were far less destructive than alternatives like artillery or airstrikes against the same targets. Capturing or killing a terrorist leader through a precision raid caused less civilian harm than bombing his location. Future operations should continue prioritizing precision over mass, using human operators to achieve results that technology alone can't provide without unacceptable collateral damage. Lesson 4. Tactical success doesn't guarantee strategic victory. Despite thousands of successful raids and the elimination of numerous terrorist leaders, neither Iraq nor Afghanistan emerged as stable democracies. Tactical excellence in night raids didn't produce strategic success in the broader campaigns. The lesson: Special Operations are tools, not strategies. They can degrade enemy capabilities, disrupt networks, and eliminate leaders, but they can't solve underlying political, economic, or social problems that create the conditions for insurgency. Lesson 5. Human costs must be factored into planning. The psychological and physical toll on operators who conducted hundreds of combat missions was significant and, in retrospect, predictable. Yet the military was unprepared for the scale of mental health issues among special operations veterans. Future operations requiring sustained high-tempo special operations must include realistic planning for human costs, rotation policies that prevent excessive deployments, mental health resources scaled to demand, and transition support for veterans moving to civilian life. The legacy of night raids ultimately resides in the individuals who conducted them and the lives they touched. Staff Sergeant Marcus Thompson, whose squad's raid opened this narrative, conducted 287 combat missions across 4 deployments. He left the Army in 2012 as a sergeant first class, married, had 2 children, and became a police officer in his hometown. He doesn't talk about his time in Rangers except with other veterans who understand. The memories remain vivid: the helicopter insertions, the breaches, the split-second decisions, the faces seen through night vision. He carries it quietly, one of thousands of men who did extraordinary things and returned to ordinary lives. Master Sergeant Thomas Payne, the Delta operator, received the Medal of Honor in 2020 for actions during a 2015 hostage rescue mission in Iraq. He remained in Delta, continuing to deploy, continuing to conduct missions. His story became public only because of the Medal of Honor. Delta typically operates in secrecy, its operators' names and actions remaining classified. Payne represents countless others whose heroism will never be publicly recognized because the missions remain secret. Specialist Robert James, the Ranger who struggled with PTSD, eventually got help through the VA and peer support groups. He found purpose working with veteran organizations, helping other combat veterans transition to civilian life. His healing came not from forgetting his combat experiences, but from finding meaning in them, using what he learned in Rangers to help others. Not everyone's story ended well. Some Rangers and Delta operators didn't survive their combat deployments. Others survived physically but couldn't overcome psychological wounds, their stories ending in suicide years after leaving service. Their names are inscribed on memorials, their sacrifices honored, their families left to cope with losses that never fully heal. The Iraqi and Afghan families whose homes were raided carry their own stories. Some appreciated the removal of terrorists from their neighborhoods. Others resented foreign soldiers violating their homes, regardless of justification. Many had mixed feelings, understanding why raids occurred but traumatized by the experience. 20 years of night raids fundamentally changed special operations warfare, proving that with proper support, elite units could conduct sustained campaigns that dismantled terrorist networks through relentless targeting of leadership. The Rangers and Delta operators who conducted these missions represented the best of American military capability, extensively trained, technologically equipped, and willing to accept extraordinary risks to accomplish missions that served their nation. They operated in darkness, both literal and metaphorical. Literal darkness, where night vision gave them overwhelming advantage over enemies who couldn't see. Metaphorical darkness, where missions remained classified, actions were never publicly acknowledged, and sacrifices often went unrecognized except by those who served alongside them. The moral complexity of night raids, the home invasions, the civilian casualties, the detained innocents, the cultural violations, can't be ignored. These operations, even when legally justified and tactically necessary, created costs that extended beyond the enemy combatants killed or captured. But neither can the necessity be ignored. The terrorists targeted through night raids weren't theoretical threats. They were people actively planning attacks that would kill innocents. The choice wasn't between perfect options and flawed ones, but between imperfect options with different costs. The Rangers and Delta operators who conducted these missions didn't choose the wars. They didn't determine strategy. They didn't make policy decisions about America's role in Iraq and Afghanistan. They executed the missions they were assigned with skill, courage, and professionalism that deserves recognition. The legacy lives in multiple places. And the tactics and procedures that evolved through thousands of raids, now documented in training manuals and taught to new generations of special operators. In the technology that was developed or refined to support night raids, from night vision systems to communications gear to biometric collection devices, in the intelligence methods that proved terrorist networks could be mapped and systematically dismantled through patient analysis and continuous operations. In the communities of veterans who conducted these missions, maintaining bonds forged through shared danger and continuing to support each other decades after leaving service. And in the reminder that some missions can only be accomplished by warriors willing to walk into darkness, literal and metaphorical, accepting risks that most people will never face, conducting operations that most people will never know about, carrying burdens that most people will never understand. The night raids are largely over. The large-scale campaigns in Iraq and Afghanistan have ended. But the warriors remain, some still serving, conducting missions we won't know about for years. Others transition to civilian life, carrying their experiences forward in ways visible and invisible. They are the Rangers and Delta operators who owned the night, who hunted America's enemies through darkness, who proved that even the most dangerous terrorists couldn't hide when elite warriors came hunting at 3 a.m. Their story deserves to be told, their sacrifices honored, and their service remembered, even when the missions remain classified, even when the full truth can't be shared, even when the moral complexity resists simple narratives of heroism. They went into the darkness so others could live in light. That's the story of night raids. That's the legacy of Rangers and Delta Force in Iraq and Afghanistan. And that's why, years after the missions ended, we must remember what they accomplished and what it cost. Accomplished and what it cost. Accomplished and what it cost. Accomplished and what it cost.